Start recording. Thank you very much. So welcome everybody. My name is Paul Shannon. I want to welcome all of you to this important Zoom meeting about the war industry in our country and specifically about the war industry in Massachusetts. So let us begin. The war industry infests the American economy like a cancer, sapping its strength and distorting its creativity while devouring its treasure. These are the words of Christian Sorensen, our speaker this evening. Christian is an Air Force veteran and an independent journalist mainly focused on the U.S. war industry. He is author of the book, Understanding the War Industry, published by Clarity Press. He is a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network, an organization of independent veteran, military, and national security experts. He has his own website that is filled with information that breaks down various monthly distillations of Pentagon contracts. And tomorrow, when we send you an email and related to tonight, we'll give you the link to his website. Referring to Christian's new book, Andrew Coburn writes, quote, "To an ever-increasing extent, the business of America is the business of war." Brian, could you put that slide of the book up? That's great. But although Americans live in the shadow of a war economy, few understand the full extent of its power and influence. Thanks to Christian Sorensen's deeply researched book into the military-industrial complex that envelops our society, such ignorance can no longer be an excuse, unquote. Even those of us who rail against the military-industrial complex do not understand this, quote, full extent of its power and influence, unquote. Once we do, we can figure out strategies to confront this monstrous entity that is rapidly stealing our country from us. In so doing, we can start disentangling ourselves from this web of death in which our lives are presently embedded and move them instead into the web of life that we are trying to construct. Please welcome Christian Sorensen. Christian.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Cole. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone at Mass Peace Action and around New England and everyone who's tuning in. I really appreciate this opportunity, and away we go. Can everyone see my slides? We good?
Yes.
Great.
All right. War all around us. The U.S. war industry in Massachusetts. To begin, what is the Military-Industrial Congressional Complex, the MIC? The MIC is an insulated authority. It consists of the U.S. military establishment, headquartered in the Pentagon, the war industry, which are the corporations that design, market, and sell goods and services to the U.S. military, to U.S. intelligence, and to allied capitalist governments around the world. And then the third side of the triangle is Capitol Hill, the representatives who fund the military and pass legislation abetting the permanent warfare state. So profit is the driving force. The U.S. ruling class deploys the military worldwide for three reasons: to forcibly open countries for exploitation, to ensure the free flow of natural resources out of the global south, and because war is big business. And that's what I focus on. War is big business. So what is capital? Capital is money used to expand business in order to make more money. This traditionally comes in the form of building new factories. You build a new factory, you produce more goods and services, you sell those goods and services, you make more money, and on it goes. To make more money, more and more parts of life must be pulled into capital. So that's why we see everything in civilian life being commodified. Food, housing, land, water, your data, your personal information, nothing is off limits. And that's why we see corporations taking over more and more military functions. Capital is also money that is put toward cultivating and promoting politicians who advocate for broad deployments and military action. It is establishing and funding media and think tanks to propagandize and generate militant narratives. It is attaining a US military establishment so rife with corporations that it becomes one bloated, self-justifying, profitable entity, profitable to the US ruling class, that is. Capital is also arranging industry pressure groups and think tanks to award and encourage high-ranking military officers and DoD civilians who support and extend the conflicts overseas. And it's also obviously marketing, pushing, and operating goods and services that harm populations overseas and in many ways at home as well, destabilizing countries around the world and generating more profitable conflict. So what is this corporate mentality? The corporate mentality, the system itself, the system attracts and promotes humans that do harm. To ascend to the top of the corporate world, one must not just put profit over people, one must also be cruel, be deceptive. Empathy and mutual aid are shunned, ruthless competition is embraced, and exploitation of others is embraced. There have been numerous studies on this. One that I cite regularly was noted in the British Telegraph. It says 1 in 5 CEOs are psychopathic. Now, that's in general. That's in Fortune 500 companies, Fortune 100 corporations, and one can surmise that this number is far higher in war corporations. So who are the main Raytheon war profiteers? We talk about Raytheon because Raytheon has an enormous presence in Massachusetts. It is by far and away the largest war corporation in Massachusetts. Here we go. This diverse group here. You have the CEO and then the 4 presidents of Raytheon's 4 segments. So Raytheon is divided into 4 segments: Collins Aerospace, Pratt & Whitney, Intelligence and Space, and Missiles and Defense. I also threw in the human in charge of government relations at Raytheon because this person is the #1 lobbyist, effectively, at the corporation. Raytheon's facilities are spread across the country. They often work together on producing goods and services. You can see the spread there. Pratt & Whitney, as you probably know, produces engines primarily for aircraft. Collins Aerospace does power and control systems for aircraft, avionics, fuel control, and Intelligence and Space focuses a lot on hardware and software, obviously for intelligence purposes and space purposes. These 4 divisions in Raytheon are not absolute. They're not firm. They're more administrative divisions for the corporate honchos to understand what's going on. This map I made based on the fiscal year 2020 contract. So this is some Raytheon activity that showed up in the Raytheon facilities that showed up in the fiscal year 2020 contracts. So you can see the clusters, and the clusters form basically around where the main hubs of the US war industry in general are. So you see around the nation's capital, that's where many of the headquarters are. Lockheed Martin's headquarters is in Bethesda, Maryland, for example. And they all have offices, even if their headquarters like Raytheon is in Waltham, Massachusetts, it still has plenty of offices in and around the nation's capital and facilities as well. Sterling, Virginia, Reston, Virginia, Tyson's Corner, McLean, Virginia. You'll see these come up all the time, again and again in the public contracts. Southern California, another huge place for the US war industry. So what are business sectors of war? Business sectors of war are military functions that corporations now run. In many cases, the troops, the soldiers, the sailors, airmen, Marines, they used to do many of these jobs. But over time, particularly since the Clinton administration, although this is not by any means a blaming Clinton, this is a progression over time, pretty much since the Vietnam War, wherein corporations take over more and more government function. Large war corporations specialize in multiple business sectors of war. So Raytheon does a lot. Lockheed Martin, a lot of business sectors of war. And here are many of the prominent business sectors of war that I see when distilling Pentagon contracts every month. A large war corporation will do will sell goods and services pertaining to multiple business sectors of war. Raytheon, for example, has a lot of space, goods and services. This is work on nuclear weaponry. Most of these business sectors of war, Raytheon's involved in. It's important to note that space as a business sector of war, space as a military quote unquote domain is largely corporate. One of the biggest pushes to establish a space force was the war industry, because they know if you get an entirely new military branch dedicated to space, then you have an entirely new budget coming your way to then take over. So Raytheon sells goods and services pertaining to most business sectors of war. Excellent. Sales. Really quickly, the US government is the primary customer of large war corporations, Raytheon included. US war corporations also sell to capitalist regimes around the world. They do this through direct commercial sales. That is the corporation to the recipient, to the customer, or foreign military sales, which is wherein the US government is the intermediary. So it goes corporation to US government to the customer overseas. And that is, foreign military sales tend to do with sensitive goods and services or big ticket items. All right. There's an enormous amount of money to be had here. It's more than any of us, any human can possibly fathom. In fiscal year 2020, the US war industry sold $50.8 billion, with a B, billion dollars through foreign military sales, and $124.3 billion through direct commercial sales. Large war corporations and medium-sized ones have offices around the world in order to liaise with foreign governments, foreign militaries, and to make these deals. Raytheon has offices in the UK, in Australia, in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE. Breakdown of Raytheon sales. This is from Raytheon's report to the SEC. I think this was last year's report, if I remember correctly. Look at total net sales on the bottom. 2018, 34 billion. 2019, 45 billion. 2020, 56 billion. Raytheon merged with United Technologies Corporation, UTC, during the last fiscal year. So that's in part explains the increase from 2019 to 2020. But you can see in the breakdown, foreign military sales, direct commercial sales, these are huge chunks. Some examples of Raytheon foreign military sales, recent ones: Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE. These are governments that are not known for their positive human rights record. Not to mention the US government, which has the worst human rights record of them all of Raytheon's customers, but that's not included in foreign military sales. The one at the bottom, I note because it is common for customers overseas to be bundled on a given contract. So Javelin is a shoulder-launched anti-tank weapon system. It is made by Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, and it is sold to many, many customers. And what you see in the public contract announcements that the Pentagon puts out is, for Javelin, for other weapon systems, countries, recipient customers are often bundled together And the war industry pitches this to the Pentagon as, hey, if we have more customers, then it reduces the unit cost for you, the Pentagon. Now, obviously, that's not their main intent. Their main intent is to profit, but the Pentagon eats it up. So there are laws on the books that prevent goods and services from the U.S. war industry from going to militaries that have committed human rights violations, serious human rights violations. And there's a law in the book, the Arms Export Control Act, which says that recipients, that customers of U.S. war industry goods and services cannot use them in an offensive manner. They must be used in self-defense. Now, these laws are just ignored. They're just ignored. Nobody within the authority, the insulated authority that is the military-industrial congressional triangle, pays any attention to these. I mean, they know, they're aware of them, but they don't follow them because nobody in authority, it's not profitable professionally or financially to anyone in authority. They pay lip service to it, as you see with State Department pronouncements, but you just ignore them. So speaking of human rights violations, what is apartheid Israel's role in all of this? Now, I bring apartheid Israel into the conversation because of the recent massacre in Gaza, which Israel does on a regular basis, 2008, 2009, 2014, and again and again. Apartheid Israel is also important because it's a Raytheon customer, which we will get into. So why does the Pentagon favor apartheid Israel? Why does the Pentagon itself, the headquarters of the U.S. military establishment, favor apartheid Israel? There's a shared ideology. They're both settler colonial states. They are both aggressive institutions. They operate together. The New York Times has reported, and other outlets have reported, on Israel and the U.S. military coordinating and operating together in the Sinai Peninsula to go after, sundry bad guys, quote unquote. When your foreign policy is based on demonizing practitioners within the Middle East of a certain religion, then you use that justification to, the war industry and the Pentagon use that justification to expand operations. So the Sinai Peninsula militants, quote unquote, in the Sinai pose no threat whatsoever to the United States government or to the United States people, but that doesn't stop the military from going in there. They train together, apartheid Israel and the U.S. military. The Pentagon has, in recent years, increased the amount of military stuff that is stored ahead of time, pre-positioned within the apartheid state. The Pentagon also purchases from Israeli war corporations, and the Pentagon and apartheid Israel are part of an alliance against Iran, which is one of the main official enemies, the main official bad guys of the U.S. government. Included in that alliance, obviously, is Saudi Arabia and UAE, who are also huge customers of the U.S. war industry. Why does the war industry favor apartheid Israel? So we talked about the Pentagon favoring Israel. Why does the war industry do it? The war industry, by the way, is more in bed with apartheid Israel than the Pentagon. There are still people in the Pentagon who understand at least the nature of the conflict. And while the institution itself is firmly on apartheid Israel's side, there are individuals within the overall U.S. military establishment who understand the nature of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, quote unquote conflict, who understand the nature of Israel aggression. And so that at least should be noted. They're a minority as far as I can tell, but it's not uniform. The war industry, on the other hand, loves apartheid Israel, They love it because of the money. So towards the bottom of the screen, apartheid Israel gets $3.5 billion a year from U.S. taxpayers. U.S. taxpayers pay their taxes to the U.S. government. U.S. government gives $3.8 billion of those taxes to apartheid Israel. Apartheid Israel turns around and uses most of that money to purchase from the U.S. war industry. So that's the big reason right there. Also, the U.S. war industry views the apartheid state as a testing ground, a proving ground, or a test bed. Because Israel is always using U.S. war industry goods and services against the Palestinians and often against neighboring states. Apartheid Israel has bombed every single one of its neighbors over the course of its brief existence. Since 1948, it's bombed every single one of its neighbors, and many beyond. Bombed the Sudan, bombed Iraq. So, and there's also a great deal of research and development collaboration between the U.S. war industry and apartheid Israel. So Raytheon products are used by apartheid Israel. Mostly missiles. This is based on the last few years of sales. So air-to-air missiles, surface-to-air missiles, that type of thing. So the war industry in Massachusetts, this is the meat of the talk. Look at the list on the right. Top defense contractors. It should say top war corporations, but we'll let that euphemism slide. So Raytheon by far is number one. This slide, by the way, is from it's from a Pentagon office. I believe it's the Office of Local Defense Community Cooperation, something like that. Raytheon's number one in Massachusetts in terms of tax dollars received. General Electric, number two. General Dynamics, MIT, Draper Lab, Mitre. We'll talk about all of these. Mitre, Noble, Oasis, RollsRoyce, and Kinetic. We'll talk about these and more, but that's the general list. These are the bad guys. I mean, to put it bluntly, these are the bad guys. If you get anything out of this talk, if there's any takeaway from this talk, this is it right here. Boston is home to two of the major financial organizations investing in war corporations: State Street and Wellington. These are a stone throw from South Station. The US financial industry sits at the top of the war industry. And it does it in two ways. Financial firms either own the majority stock in any given war corporation, or they outright own a war corporation. So if you look at the stocks, the large institutional holders of stock of Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, L3Harris, any of the big ones. The financial industry, financial firms own the majority shares, and they prioritize short-term profit maximization. That's the key. You must maximize profit in the short term. Every quarter, every annual report, every quarter, every annual report. You must. And yeah, so like I said, sometimes a financial firm, a private equity group, for example, will own a war corporation outright. These private equity groups, by the way, they are constantly buying portions of small and medium-sized war corporations, blending them together, and then selling them, trading back and forth. And the big war corporations do it all the time. So like Leidos might buy the, the night vision segment of, L3Harris, for example, and they go back and forth. So it's something to keep in mind as you understand the war industry. All right. So Boston Ship Repair, it wasn't on the list that the Pentagon put out, but it does a sizable amount of business in the Pentagon contracts. It shows up fairly regularly. It does maintenance, dry docking, overhauling of ships, and Military Sea Lift Command is number one customer. Military Sea Lift Command is in charge of moving goods, materiel, sometimes troops over the 7 seas. Charles River Analytics, you can see it on the map right there over in Cambridge. It is one of the area labs that does really advanced research and development. We'll come across more of these labs, but Charles River Analytics does some serious advanced research and development. You can see it does artificial intelligence, works on underwater vehicles, it works on connecting everything. One of the big Pentagon big ticket projects that is getting off the ground in recent years is an effort to connect everything. I mean, it's unbelievably profitable for the war industry, and the Pentagon loves it because it's this another pie in the sky idea of, new type of warfare, some nonsense. And the generals love it. They put it on their performance reports. Anyway, it's if you connect everything from the satellite to the top to the shooter on the ground, this is the 21st century warfare, as they say. Charles River Analytics and all the other labs in and around Boston, by the way, recruit heavily from academia in the state. MIT, big time. Harvard, of course, Tufts. So keep that in mind. Noble's headquarters is in Boston, but the facility that shows up in the Pentagon's contracts is in Rockland. Noble and another corporation called Supply Corps. Supply Corps is out in Illinois. They contract with the Defense Logistics Agency, which is fairly self-explanatory. Basically, these two corporations do a lot of the acquiring of stuff, gear, small supplies, small construction materials on behalf of the Defense Logistics Agency. Teledyne FLIR does anything to do with vision. So you can see it on the map northwest of Boston. Works on thermal imaging systems, whether you can put it on a rifle, you can put it on sometimes the bottom of small drones or aircraft, anything like that. Anything to help you see, that's FLIR, Teledyne FLIR. General Dynamics, one of the big fellas. It has 3 locations, Quincy, Taunton, and Pittsfield. Pittsfield works on hardware and software for ships. It says, according to the corporation, our computing technology controls everything driving the ship, from driving the ship to firing the guns. So that's specific to the littoral combat ship, which is another big ticket, overpriced, behind schedule, large platform that the war industry is working on. One of many these days that is over budget and behind schedule. Taunton, down in Taunton, they work on communications equipment that the Army purchases, and in Quincy over there on the shore, underwater vehicles. General Electric, northeast of Boston in Lynn, Massachusetts, is one of the major producers of aircraft engines for a variety of aircraft. Another producer is Rolls-Royce, which we'll get into, and another producer is Honeywell, which we will also, well, we won't get into Honeywell, but it's important to have that in mind because it's a top 20 war corporation. Hydroid, see it on the map there, works on underwater vehicles. It's down in Bourne and Pocasset. It was purchased recently by Huntington Ingalls. Huntington Ingalls is one of the two large ship manufacturers within the U.S. war industry. The other one being General Dynamics. Huntington Ingalls and General Dynamics get no bid contracts all the time, and they subcontract to one another. So, for a new submarine, for example, General Dynamics down in Groton, Connecticut will get the big contract and no bid, and then it will subcontract with Huntington Ingalls. Huntington Ingalls do the same thing for a large, destroyer or something. Right across Buzzards Bay, directly across the bay, Lockheed Martin Sipican works on some of the same stuff: underwater vehicles, torpedo parts, submarine antenna. It is expected to close within the next couple of years, as Lockheed Martin and other large war corporations are always trying to maximize profit. So one of the ways they do this is to say the hell with the workers and to close plants and try to consolidate. L3 Harris is the 6th or 7th largest U.S. war corporation. L3 used to be separate from Harris. They merged within the last couple of years. There is a presence in Northampton, Ayer, and Wilmington. Northampton, by far, is the most popular L3 Harris location in Massachusetts in terms of Pentagon contracting. There, they work on submarine masts, which are used for communication, radar, and periscopes for vision. MIT, up in Cambridge. So academia's job within the war industry is threefold. First and foremost, research and development. By far and away, that's the most important job of academia within the U.S. war industry. The second job is as a holding station. A holding station, what I mean by that is you have the revolving door, the corrupt officials who rotate from the Pentagon to the war industry to Capitol Hill, especially when they're ascending in their careers. They stop off at Capitol Hill and are often senior staffers for somebody on the Armed Services Committee or somebody on the Intelligence Committee. And as they work their way up, they rotate around the revolving door. And part of that is often stopping off within the war industry, within academia, as a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab or Harvard's Belfer Center, something like that. The third job of academia is to accept philanthropy, quote unquote philanthropy, accept money basically from war profiteers, war criminals, vulture capitalists. The academic institution benefits because it says, hey, we're getting all this money, and the brutal capitalist benefits because their name is whitewashed. They get their name on a building, and everyone says, "Oh, right, what a philanthropist! What a nice guy! What a gentleman!" So MIT runs Lincoln Lab, which is at Hanscom Air Force Base. Hanscom Air Force Base is northwest of Boston. It's just beyond 95. A lot of research and development goes on at Hanscom Air Force Base. So you see it a lot in the contracts, and the war corporations know where the money is. So a lot of major war corporations have offices in and around Hanscom in order to benefit from the money that's flowing through there. Draper Lab, Charles Stark Draper Lab up in Cambridge, used to be part of MIT, branched off many years ago. Again, it works on advanced research and development for military and intelligence purposes. The big thing that it does, at least in the public contract announcements that I study, is the Trident II submarine-launched nuclear weapon, ballistic missile. This is a Lockheed Martin product, but Draper works on the guidance, navigation, and control system. You can see it on the map right there. Just go right off, right over in Cambridge, Draper Lab right there. Mitre was also part of MIT. Branched off, it's now a not-for-profit. It does a lot of research and development. Its main locations per US or per the contracts that I study are Bedford, Massachusetts, you can see there on the map, and McLean, Virginia. Now these two locations work hand in hand on a lot of the goods and services, but you can see it's near Hanscom Air Force Base right there, and it shows up all the time at Hanscom. There's a great interview, if you look at the bottom of the screen, Cold War radar system, $1 trillion fraud. Paul Jay interviewed a former engineer, I believe, who used to work for Mitre. And it's on the Real News Network website, and it was published 24 December 2018. Very important, so please check it out. Oasis Systems shows up at Hanscom all the time. It does systems engineering, it does IT. You can see it on the map right off of 95. All right, this is the elephant in the room, Raytheon. Headquarters in Waltham, again, off of 95. It has facilities all over Massachusetts. Andover is one of those facilities. Works on radar. This facility and many others, not just Raytheon, but in large war corporations across the US, have undergone a lot of automation in recent years. So the capitalists know that if they can automate more and more jobs, then they don't have to pay the workers. They can say, worker, bye-bye, and then we'll have this machine do it. So the working class gets hosed, gets screwed, and the capitalist gets to squeeze more money that goes to the top. It goes to CEO compensation, and it goes to Wall Street profits. Raytheon BBN. So BBN was in one of these labs that we talked about, kind of like Charles River Analytics. Works on very, very advanced research and development for military and a lot for US intelligence agencies. Raytheon purchased it in 2009, and it works on research and development for DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And you can see some examples there: speech recognition, machine learning, underwater communications, navigation, tracking hostile forces. These are some of the hardest technical challenges that war corporations have. And Raytheon BBN is it attracts the most brilliant minds. And it's such a shame. I mean, imagine what you could do with this. Brain drain is one of the great horrors of the permanent warfare state, because these minds could be solving, or at least addressing, some of the serious global challenges that we have, but they go into the war machine, produce nothing of value. Nothing of value. People will say, hey, GPS, that came from war. Internet, that came from, war funding. But these are ancillary benefits. These are ancillary benefits. If you put all the brain power that the war machine has toward intentionally producing products that help humanity, imagine what we'd have. Imagine what we'd have. We wouldn't just have a few ancillary benefits. We'd be living in a far greater society, and we'd have far less death and destruction. Marlborough, Raytheon has a plant in Marlborough. Again, works on radar, works on the Patriot surface-to-air missile system. Satellite communication, works on a Lockheed Martin product known as Aegis, which is ship-based and actually ground-based in some locations in Eastern Europe. Does missiles, works on missile guidance system. I bring up Patriot because there are 17 customers that Raytheon sells the Patriot system to. And the US government is just one of them. So we get back to foreign military sales on that. Tewksbury works on electronic warfare, surface-to-air missiles, hardware and software for ships. Wooburn, see it right there on the map off of 93. Radar to track ballistic missiles. Let you look at the details there. In the contracts that I study, you see multiple locations working together, and Raytheon is no exception. So on these dates, 21 February 2020, Tewksbury location, Marlborough, and Andover all work together on radar spares and engineering for a giant aircraft carrier. Same thing on 1 May 2020, but also involved the Portsmouth, Rhode Island location. Construction. The Pentagon is the #1 employer of construction workers in the United States, according to my calculations. And it employs construction firms based in New England and in Massachusetts. This is so harmful because military construction physically lays the foundation that expands the permanent warfare state. Every construction contract expands the permanent warfare state, and it's just kicking the can down the road because eventually we're going to have to demilitarize. It's going to happen sooner or later, one way or another, and this construction just kicks the can down the road further. Tetra Tech is one of the large project management engineering firms that shows up again and again in Pentagon construction contracts. And Tetra Tech has many locations around the US, and one of these locations is in Marlborough. Some construction examples here. The other day, we had one where a bunch of New England construction firms were contracted by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, New England District, for construction in and around New England. There's another shady contract. Israel has hired a construction firm called CDM Constructors, Inc., based in Boston, to build stuff in Israel, in the apartheid state. So if there's anybody from BDS Boston, that might be a good organization to take a look at. We do not want to be involved in that. US-UK special relationship. There are many ties that bind the ruling class within the United States and the United Kingdom together. One of these ties is the war industry. The US war industry sells to the UK, and the UK war industry sells to the US. BAE Systems. BAE Systems PLC is based in London, based in the United Kingdom. It is a huge corporation, huge. It rivals some of the largest US war corporations in terms of size. BAE Systems' most profitable and productive facilities are in the United States. BAE Systems PLC has a subsidiary called BAE Systems Inc., Incorporated, and that's what operates in the United States. One of these locations, BAE locations, is Burlington, Massachusetts, where again, it works on really difficult research and development projects for military and intelligence applications. On the right, you can see machine learning algorithms, surveillance software, navigation system prototypes. Another UK corporation with a subsidiary in Massachusetts is Rolls-Royce. The parent company, Rolls-Royce PLC, based in the UK. One of the subsidiaries has a branch in Walpole, which works on propellers for ships. It's important to note that the real, one of the real productive and profitable Rolls-Royce locations is in Indianapolis, which works on engines for aircraft. Kinetic. Okay, so you know the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA. You know this. The UK had something like that. Okay, they called theirs the Defense Evaluation and Research Agency, DARA. A few years back, they corporatized it. They said, all right, we're going to turn 3/4 of it into a corporation, which became Kinetic. And the other quarter basically stayed in the government. Kinetic then went on to purchase Foster Miller, which is based in Waltham. You can see it on the map right there. Foster Miller works on producing robots to defuse ordnance, unexploded ordnance, mines, improvised explosive devices, stuff like that. Ultra Maritime. The parent company is a UK corporation, but Ultra has a branch in Braintree, Massachusetts. You can see right there. Works on torpedo kits, torpedo countermeasures. Countermeasures are things that stop whatever it is. So things that stop a torpedo from approaching your vessel, and surface radar. Just hitting the surface here. Here are some other corporations that came up. These aren't as big as the ones that I mentioned, but they're important to note. So we'll take a moment just to look at this. You see the locations, see the goods and services. Summary. Financial firms. This is most important. The most important thing is the financial firms. They are the foundation. They are the top and the bottom, I guess, depending on how you look at it. They are the foundation, the bottom, and they are the top profiteers. Is what I'm trying to say of the U.S. war industry. They State Street and Wellington, some of the largest institutional investors in U.S. war corporations. Then you have Raytheon, which you talked about, General Dynamics, General Electric, MIT. You have the labs, Draper Lab, Mitre, Charles River Analytics, Raytheon BBN, BAE's plant in Burlington. You have L3 Harris, has at least 3 main locations. You have construction firms, and you have subsidiaries of UK corporations. Questions? All right.
Well, when we say that the war industry is all around us, it really is. Thanks so much, Christian. Really appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Will this slideshow be available to us to catch up on a few of those things?
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'll send you the slides for sure.
Okay, that's great. It'd be good if we could kind of map out some of that stuff.
Sure.
Well, I have some questions, but before we get into questions, and what we're going to do is ask people to raise their hands. I see some people have. Just before getting into that, the Raytheon anti-war campaign, which is the sponsor for this webinar, it has been working, as people know, on Raytheon, obviously, and especially its relationship to Yemen. And the situation in Yemen has deteriorated to such a point where hundreds of thousands of lives are in danger of starvation right now. And so Brian from the Raytheon anti-war campaign is trying to organize an effort to try to get that war stopped as soon as possible by pressuring Congress around a particular strategy. So I wonder, Brian, could you come in just before we begin the question and answer and explain this, because we really need people's help on this.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. And I just want to thank Christian for that amazing presentation. I kept wanting you to stop and say, that's got to be it, right? No more, no, but as Paul said, yeah, the military industrial complex isn't just an idea. It's something that is all over our backyard here in Massachusetts, and I hope that inspires everyone listening to get involved. But as Paul said, the initial idea behind the Raytheon anti-war campaign was to localize the war in Yemen, the worst humanitarian catastrophe in the world. Is not just something going on the other side of the world. It is something that is deeply connected to Massachusetts, both because billions of dollars in profits are being reaped by Massachusetts-based corporations, like some of the ones that Christian mentioned, and also because of the massive political influence of these corporations and the revolving door, including as high up as the current Secretary of Defense and the last officially ratified Secretary of Defense under Trump. Both came to us from Raytheon Technologies. So this corporation is driving the war in Yemen. It's keeping it going. It's not just a partisan problem. It started under the Obama administration, continued and intensified during Trump's tenure. And despite his promise to end the war in Yemen, the bombing, which is largely done by US-made warplanes almost entirely, continues. It has continued throughout the Biden administration. And we have been warned by the UN World Food Program that if something isn't done immediately, 400,000 Yemeni children are at risk of starvation this year from the ongoing war in Yemen. So we're out of time. We need to act, and we need to act now. We need to hold the Biden administration to its promise to end the war in Yemen. And we need Congress to actively retake their power, which is granted in the Constitution to them in Article 1, that they are the branch of our government that has the ability, the war power, to declare war. It's Congress's purview, and they have never, to this date, authorized U.S. involvement in hostilities in Yemen. But Yemen is not just a war that's being led by Saudi Arabia. It is actively supported by U.S. corporations. It's a U.S. war, we say all the time, because of Raytheon's presence in Massachusetts. It's a Massachusetts war. Now, for those of you that have been with us for a while, you know that during the Trump administration, Congress, every Democrat in Congress and a meaningful number of Republicans, for the first time in a generation, for the first time since its passage in 1973, in both chambers, House and Senate, passed a war powers resolution, telling Donald Trump, we did not authorize this war and it must be ended. Now, that was a meaningful victory, but unfortunately, Donald Trump vetoed that bill. But now, despite the fact that Joe Biden promised on the campaign trail and while in office to end the war in Yemen, we continue to maintain the aircraft that are bombing Yemen on a daily basis. We allow the Saudi Air Force to stay in the sky. But Congress has been relatively silent on this issue. They've led some good congressional letters, they've made some statements, but they have been unwilling to go that extra mile to say, we need to pass a privileged war powers resolution that'll go right to the floor of the House and the Senate, that will garner media attention, and that will put every member of Congress on the record saying, do you demand that President Biden stop US involvement in the war in Yemen? So the strategy that we have undertaken is to partner with organizations across the country but to focus mainly on progressive champions here in Massachusetts. So we are right now gathering signatures for a letter to send to Senator Markey and Senator Warren, who have led on this issue, as well as Chairman McGovern from Worcester, who is the powerful chair of the House Rules Committee and also the co-chair of the Commission on Human Rights. This is his purview. This is the worst human rights situation going on in the world today. And we don't need some strategy that's going to take months to implement and may not get a hearing. We need a war powers resolution that will go to the floor in less than a week. So right now, well, I will say that the rationale for this strategy, I wrote out in an article that was in the Mass Peace Action newsletter and was recently published by Covert Action magazine. I'll send the link to that. It has a lot of our reasoning about why we need to do this now. And right now we're gathering organizational signatures for a letter demanding that a war powers resolution be introduced by Senator Markey, Senator Warren, or Chairman McGovern, because as I said, we're out of time. If we are going to make a meaningful change in the lives of these 400,000 children that are at risk right now, we need action. And we need our progressive champions on Yemen from the past to maintain that pressure, even though it's a member of their own party now who sits in the Oval Office. This isn't about partisanship. This is about ending the war in Yemen. And that shouldn't change just because it's Joe Biden in the White House now and not Donald Trump. So I encourage you, our partners from organizations, to sign on to this letter, to spread it around. It'll be in the follow-up email as well. And we want to get as much pressure on these folks as possible. And we will be delivering it to them in person. And we're not going to stop our advocacy until the war in Yemen is over. We've said that always, and that doesn't change just because the party of the president has changed. So that's enough from me. I want to get to all your great questions for Christian, and just thank you again, Christian, for the service that you just did us in sharing your expertise. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Brian. Let's move into the questions. Brian, can you unmute Michael Hoey to ask his question?
Go ahead, Michael.
So my first question deals with offshore production. My understanding is that countries like Australia, India, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia are all building factories so that they can take over the production of some of their domestic war needs. I'd like you to comment on that. And the second question is automated warfare. Apparently, as part of our full spectrum dominance, we're building ships, kamikaze-like ships that can pilot themselves, similar to how drones can be used. And I'm wondering how you feel about the future of automated warfare that's the computers taking over.
Okay, so the first question was about domestic production overseas in capitalist countries that are allied to the U.S. war industry. So the short answer is it depends on the country. So if you are a tight ally, or if your ruling class is tight and subservient to the U.S. ruling class, as in, for example, Australia, yeah, sure, they have their own war industry. It's relatively minor compared to the U.S. war industry. But what the U.S. war industry will do is will play the jobs card with their capitalist rulers, just like they do with Washington D.C. So they'll say, "Hey, Canberra, we will open up a small production facility in one of your towns, and in turn you can play the jobs card with your people, and we will further imbricate the alliance, your country within the alliance that is USA and Australia, for example." Apartheid Israel has a huge war industry compared to its own GDP, and it's also part of the Tel Aviv DC regime alliance. So within the overall U.S. dominated neoliberal economic order, there is no country that is developing its own war industry to substantially rival the U.S. war industry. And obviously there are factions, and obviously there's back and forth. The UK has a sizable war industry. So do some NATO allies, but it's not a competition so much as it is a collaboration. And what I really want to stress is that it's, at the end of the day, it is the workers of the world versus the ruling class. And so the ruling class makes these deals that benefit the US ruling class and the international ruling class. Joe Biden, Wall Street, Lindsey Graham, anybody in the US ruling class has more in common with the ruling class in Paris, in London, in Berlin, in Canberra, in Tel Aviv, wherever they are, than they have with their own working class population. So that's my answer to that question. I hope I did answer it in a satisfactory way. Your second question was on the automation of warfare, and this is terrifying. This is absolutely terrifying, and you are correct in that it is a trend these days to work on automation of everything. I mentioned very briefly before a connected all system that the Pentagon is working on, and by the Pentagon I mean the Pentagon gives contracts to the U.S. war industry, and the U.S. war industry works on it. It's called JADC2, if I remember correctly, Joint All Domain Command and Control. And it's basically trying to connect everything from the most distant satellite to the boots on the ground. And yeah, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying because it uses increased amounts of machine learning, artificial intelligence. And so, yeah, it's absolutely terrifying because they always claim that there's a human in the loop, but more and more often there are fewer humans in the loop. And this has to stop because it only ends with absolute catastrophe. We've narrowly dodged nuclear war multiple times, not just Able Archer in '83, not just the Cuban Missile Crisis of the '60s, but again and again and again. And yeah, that's my answer to that.
Okay, well, thank you, Christian. We'll take the next question from Renee Sigerson.
It's Sigerson, but that's okay. It's very nice to meet you, Christian. I want to set you up a little bit. Very soon, I'm going to be publishing in Executive Intelligence Review a review of your book, Understanding the War Industry. And I have to say, most of it is an expression of gratitude and urging people to take advantage of your incredible enthusiasm for getting to the bottom of this. But being a person who's celebrating my 50th year of direct involvement in the fight for peace through economic development, I have to say I did have a few criticisms. So I hope that I have a chance to discuss them with you.
Sure.
In that light, too, I want to say to everybody that I think that there's a tremendous opportunity because I think people are increasingly ready to move on these issues. This past weekend, I participated in a 2-day conference of the Schiller Institute entitled For the Common Good of All People, Not Rules Benefiting the Few. And to make things easy and quick, I will post on the chat line the title of the conference and the link on the internet so that others can take advantage of it. What I wanted to ask you about is, now that we're talking about I'm very curious to know your viewpoint of this, which is, since you very rightfully put the emphasis on the role of the financial institutions in running this from the top, isn't it actually the case, Christian, that is also the way that the entire global warming, Green New Deal dogma that has infiltrated universities, and we're talking about Massachusetts, we're talking about Boston, we're talking about the place that's supposed to be the Athens of America in its history, the birthplace of our nation. And yet these universities have been massively used to spread the lie that the science is closed. Everybody agrees with each other. Carbon dioxide is our big problem in the world. Not that we're murdering children in the Yemen, but it's, you know, getting rid of carbon dioxide, which is wonderful for plants and agriculture. We discussed this at our conference this week, and we actually had a whole panel, which was scientists saying this has not been proven. But who's running it from the top? It's exactly these same bankers. BlackRock is playing a major, major role in this.
Renee, we have a lot of people that want to ask questions.
Yes, good. So that's my question. I mean, can you comment on it? Sorry for taking your time, but it's exciting to participate in the discussion.
Well, thank you, Renee. That's a very important question. I will agree with you that the financial industry is in charge, is at the top, is running the show. I will say that no matter what turn we take, there are always financial institutions and bloodthirsty capitalists who will try to profit from it, whether it is war or whether it is a version of the Green New Deal. So there are multiple versions of the Green New Deal out there. And the most prominent one in DC, as I understand it, is capitalists are trying to profit off of it. So they will say, oh yeah, we'll get all this new green technology, this and that, without actually addressing the core problems that are war, that are pollution, that are the exploitation of the third world or the global south, on and on and on. So the common core is that capitalists are going to try to profit no matter what it is, whether it's a Green New Deal, whether it's a global war. I would say that we absolutely need to be on guard for that. And I will point you to a recently published interview that Rania Kalik did on Breakthrough News just today with an academic named Max Isle, I believe. I'm probably butchering his last name. And they talk about the versions of the Green New Deal and the ones that favor the international working class as opposed to US financial or multinational financial institutions. And so I would defer to that conversation because that is far, they did an absolute excellent job of laying out the problems there and the ways that the workers of the world can unite and benefit from something like that.
Okay, well, that's something to look into. Our next question comes from a phone, 508-494-9983. If Brian can unmute you, you can ask your question.
Yep. Go ahead. You're unmuted now.
Hi, sorry. It was, you kept telling me to unmute.
Well, maybe we can try you in a little while, Brian.
Yeah, she's
we can't hear you at all. We heard your salutation and that was it.
Yeah, we'll try you again after the next question.
Okay, so let's go to Mike Passerini.
Go ahead, Mike.
Are you still there, Mike? Okay, we'll come back to that. Let's go to, could we do Ian Harrington, Brian?
Go ahead. You should be able to unmute yourself, Ian, and I'll put you up on screen.
Thank you. Good evening. Thanks for the wonderful presentation. I have a basic question in that there seem to be two different ways of these sales to foreign countries. One is through the DoD, where the corporation sells their goods to the DoD and then the DoD sells them to the other country. But then there are also direct sales. I'm hoping, and this is something I just don't know, there is officially some oversight of sales of weapons from corporations in our country to other countries, but I mean, I'd love to know what is the situation there.
So just so I understand, your question is regarding foreign military sales as opposed to direct commercial sales and what the oversight, the US government oversight is, to the extent that there is any.
Right.
So there is more oversight with foreign military sales because it tends to do with big ticket items or items that might involve some sensitive technology. So that's why those go through foreign military sales. There is less oversight in direct commercial sales because it has been cleared in almost cleared in advance. Once you get into the direct commercial sales avenue, so to speak, there's less oversight. And so it goes straight from corporation to customer overseas. A lot of this is just rubber stamped anyway. And one of the trends we've seen in recent years didn't start, but it picked up steam in the Obama administration and then really in the Trump administration, is to shift as much as possible from foreign military sales into direct commercial sales, so that there's it's a way of just saying, all right, let's keep the sales going, less oversight, and do it that way. So if you see over time, I think if you look at the numbers from 2018, 2019, 2020, you see foreign military sales and direct commercial sales go like. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes in the current fiscal year. But oversight is as much oversight as a capitalist regime wants to exert, and that's little to none. I mean, the goal of a government in such an economic setup is to facilitate sales, whether it's war goods and services or anything, or telecoms or whatever industry you're in, not just to the U.S. government, but to other governments and to commercial actors around the world. So it's very much an hey, let's go. It's an encouraging atmosphere. It's not a well, wait a minute, let's stop there. And it's important to note that not just Raytheon, but all the major war corporations get a slap on the wrist once in a while in the form of a small fine. Now, relatively small to the corporation. It's a few $1 million here, a few $1 million there. Whenever they've really just completely broken one of the rules on the books. So there are certain export control laws that say, hey, you can't, evil corporation A, you cannot, export that technology to one of our official enemies, and they don't care. I mean, if you type in DuckDuckGo the name of a large war corporation and then fine, you'll see the Justice Department puts out these lists once in a while, and you'll see your top results are the lists of, Raytheon or Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or whoever getting fined a few million dollars here, a few $1 million there, every couple of years for export violations all the time. The fines are not punitively prohibitive. They're not financially prohibitive. They are not financially prohibitive. So yeah, you just pay the fine and you keep going. What is $1 million? What is $4 million to a multi-billion-dollar multinational corporation? It's nothing. That's part of the game. So to the extent that there is any oversight, it's just let's keep the business running.
Okay, thanks, Christian. Thanks, Ian. Let's go to Cam Wilson next, and then we'll come back to our previous questioners. Cam.
Now, can you hear me?
We can.
Yep.
Okay, so the law you said about not selling to a country that does bad human rights things, has anybody tried to enforce that or increase the fines?
So the problem is, there's the two main laws are the Leahy Law and the Arms Export Control Act. The Leahy Law, if I remember correctly, is you can't sell your goods and services to a military that has bad human rights record. And then the Arms Export Control Act says you have to use the goods and services in self-defense. Now, the problem is the allies, the capitalist allies of the U.S., of the Washington, D.C. regime, are the premier human rights violators in the world and the premier aggressors in the world. So if you're, some of your major customers are apartheid Israel and Saudi Arabia and the UAE, then, they seriously just don't pay attention to the law. There are plenty of laws on the books. They just ignore them. And we're in deep trouble because those elected officials in Congress who are supposed to be enforcing these laws just turn a blind eye. Why? Because they're part of the ruling class that is profiting professionally and financially from the status quo. There's somebody, if you're a Joe Schmo from, a Republican or a Democrat on the Armed Services Committee or the Intelligence Oversight Committee or any of the, sundry committees, the financial committees that deal with matters of war and peace, you are not only are you taking lobbying from war corporations, but you are taking campaign finance from war corporations. And your role is to keep the game going. Your role is not to raise a stink and raise a fuss. And to the extent that you do raise a stink or a fuss, it is almost exclusively performative. It is, I saw the other day, or it was just today, there was I believe his name is Adam Smith. He's one of the ranking members on, I believe, the Armed Services Committee. He might even be the chairman or the chairperson. And he was making a fuss about the costs of the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which is the most expensive weapons system ever developed. And it was purely performative. He's not going to change the status quo, because if you go to opensecrets.org, I believe it is, and look up his top campaign financiers, you see Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, L3 Harris, or whoever the war corporations are of the day. So it's all a game, and that's why I say that the military-industrial congressional complex is insulated. That's why I use the term insulated, because it exists for itself, by itself, and the health and welfare of the U.S. working class and the international working class is nowhere to be seen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thanks, Cam. Let's go and see if we can pick up 508-494-9983.
Okay, just asked you to unmute yourself. Why don't you try again, 508? Maybe not.
Yeah, that's too bad. Let's see if Mike is there. Mike Passerini.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. I'm sorry, Mike. Hold on a second. Go ahead.
Hi, Christian. I wondered if you could talk a little about the propaganda tactics that the weapons contractors use. In particular, something that I've observed, and I'm sure you and a lot of other people here have over the last few years, is use of identity politics by these, not just the war contractors, by a lot of big corporations, but specifically with Raytheon. They've been in this partnership for, I think, a few years now with the local Girl Scout troop. And they created this video that, I'm sure you've seen, where it's these Girl Scouts at their Waltham headquarters talking about how they're training girls to code and empowering them and everything. And then, of course, you also have seen those images of Raytheon, BAE, Lockheed at the Pride parades and everything. So I wondered if you could speak a bit on that specific and I think very insidious tactic that's used by these companies. Thanks.
Oh, it's a great question, and I mean, you really nailed it. We have to remember that this propaganda has been refined over the course of decades. One of the techniques they use is when marketing and pitching these goods and services, they use the solutions. They say we're selling solutions. They won't say weapons of death. They won't say death and destruction. They won't say bombs and missiles and stuff. They say solutions. We're just solving government's needs. It's very effective. They all do it. Number two, they say for the troops. They'll say, we're just helping the troops. So doing it for the troops. If you go to any of their websites and look at any of their public relations material, you will see for the troops. You'll see a flag. You'll see the phrase for the troops. They repeat that again and again. The corrupt politicians repeat that again and again. And just for the troops. We're not building, a new armored vehicle to go rampaging in a country that didn't ask us to be there and that doesn't want us there. We are, we're doing it for the troops. It's awful. I mean, the U.S. ruling class is what sends the troops over there in order to profit industry and profit multinational corporations and extractive industries. The troops are the pawns. But that doesn't get mentioned. Another thing they do is say, we've listened to the warfighter. We've listened to the warfighter. We've heard from the warfighter, and we're just trying to improve our products. And they do this a lot when they're selling upgrades or technical insertions. They'll say, "Oh, we've listened to the warfighter," and then there goes another, 100 million here, 10 million there, billion here, billion there. And to get to the point that you made, identity. So obviously, an industry that's based around death and destruction and war profiteering has no care for identity, whether you are anywhere on the gender spectrum, whether you are, no matter your sexual preference, war profiteers and war corporations do not care. These are purely, they're just playing the game. They see, they smell. First of all, they have very highly paid propagandists on their payrolls, and they smell which way the wind is, or they see which way the wind is blowing, and they conform. Now, obviously, they are not going to change their ways when it comes to blowing up women and children overseas, or selling goods and services that contribute to the occupation or the death and destruction of countries and social fabric overseas. So yeah, you're absolutely right in mentioning this, and it is a very insidious propaganda technique, and it has, I'm very sad to say, fooled many or worked really well with many willing collaborators on Capitol Hill. There are, both capitalist factions are horrible on matters of war and peace, but the Democrats at least have some semblance of decent PR when it comes to this stuff. And so, you'll have a very amiable, smiling Democrat who will say, "Hey, yeah, identity, awesome, hoo-ha," and they just they go along with it. They smile, and unfortunately, it works in co-opting a portion of the U.S. working class to then get along and get on board with these very very horrible corporations that are at the core of the rot and the self-implosion of our own society. So excellent question, and yeah, you nailed it.
Okay, thanks. Good question, Mike. Before we take Cole's question, Christian has agreed to stay with us till 8:30. I know people have to get to other things, but if you want to hang on for another 10 minutes, we'll take another question or two. And just before that question, I just want to mention that we can continue to ignore the realities around us in terms of these companies, not just Raytheon, but the others. But this is, if we're really serious about creating peace, we have to start to get a handle on how to deal with this institution around us, because there's a lot of potential here for ending these wars if we can go after these companies and really hurt them in a way that they will have to back off, just at least to preserve their reputations. So if you're willing to help us out, we have this Raytheon anti-war campaign. We're going to have our next meeting 5 o'clock on July 12th to kind of go over things we can do and try to figure out how we build a movement around these issues that Christian has raised. So tomorrow in the email that Brian will send out to you, there'll be information about that. We encourage you to join our little planning group for the Raytheon campaign, so that we can really figure out the best way to relate to these realities and work for peace. The next question would be from Cole Harrison.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Christian. Great information, and this is very sobering for us. But two questions related, I think. One is, I was impressed by the number of companies in Massachusetts that you named. What role does Massachusetts itself play in the overall picture of the war industry? Does it have a distinctive role? Elizabeth Warren and Seth Moulton tell us that we're, the high-tech sector of the war industry is one of Massachusetts' strengths. They're very proud of that. Is that true? And is that really the main aspect of what Massachusetts is doing for the war machine? And the second is, more generally, do you see any political vulnerabilities of these companies? You mentioned the banks, you mentioned the companies themselves. What's the best way for organizers to get a handle on this massive problem?
Excellent questions. So to start, I would say, if you look at the war industry in terms of states, across the U.S., I would say Massachusetts is in the second tier. So the states that really have a problem with the war industry include Maryland, Virginia, Texas, Southern California. These are the places where they are just absolutely infested. Florida, parts of Florida, especially around Tampa and around Orlando. These are the hubs of the war industry. Now, Massachusetts has a sizable problem. I do not want to downplay this at all. I would say it's probably 9 or 10 if you were to rank the states according to the influence of the war industry as tallied by in terms of U.S. tax dollars that go into the war corporations that are in the given state. So I'd say, yeah, Massachusetts is probably 9 or 10, so it's in the second tier. Yes, you are correct. The war industry in Massachusetts focuses primarily on advanced research and development, on really tricky problems. And part of that is the legacy of the microchip industry or the microprocessors in and around the old 128. And part of that is the stellar academic institutions that the war industry recruits from in and around New England. There is a lot of research and development focused on information technology. So information technology is the number one type of good or service that the war industry in general works on, that the war industry sells. So if you were to catalog the contracts that the Pentagon puts out by type of business sector of war, information technology is the most common. And Massachusetts, the war corporations in Massachusetts work on a lot of information technology. That is computers, hardware, software, that type of thing. BAE's lab in Burlington, Raytheon BBN in Cambridge, Charles River Analytics does a lot of this. Draper, of course, MIT, multiple Raytheon locations. So yeah, so that's that. The war corporations play the jobs card. They play it in Massachusetts. They play it in every state, and they play it with the politicians. Now they're never obligated to come through with that number of jobs. They'll say, "Hey, corrupt politician Joe Schmo." They'll say, "Hey, you love us. We're going to get 200 jobs at this location over the next couple of years." And either the politician is no longer around when those jobs, come or don't come, or the politician doesn't hold them to account because the politician is just as corrupt as the next guy or the next, human. And so they play the jobs card. It's just to win over the politician, and they're not really.
You froze up for a minute.
Ever obligated to come, so they'll always inflate it. It's a game. It's a game. That one side of the war industry, or the one side of the MIC plays with another side. Brain drain is a serious problem in Massachusetts, though. Brain drain is when a brilliant mind from academia could go and work for something that for a project that betters humanity or helps us all, but instead goes off course and goes and works for the war industry or the war machine in general. And that's a serious problem because Harvard, Tufts, MIT, and on, they pump out, Boston College, BU, Northeastern, they pump out really brilliant minds. And the more money you throw at the war machine, the more, or the war industry, the more the war industry is able to recruit from these academic institutions. And the worse off we all get as a society. So that's something we absolutely need to address. And that goes into your second question, which is the vulnerabilities. I would say, so these corporations, they care about short-term profit above all else. So hit them in the wallet and organize around that. Hit them where it hurts. Get them at the counter-recruiting events, at job fairs. Do what you've been doing so far, which is public protests, which is highlighting their role in the atrocities that their weapons, that their goods and services are the harm that they're causing overseas, from apartheid Israel to Saudi Arabia's role and UAE's role in Yemen to anything. I mean, there was goods and services used in the Philippines, suppressing rebellion in the southern Philippines within the last few years. No matter where it is in the world, the top 6, 7, 8 U.S. war corporations are, involve Colombia, human rights violations right there. Lockheed Martin's plant down, Sikorsky plant down in Connecticut, sells to the Colombian government. So I would advocate for a robust international legal regime that works on pursuing them in criminal courts. It's going to be very difficult to get at them through corrupt U.S. politicians because the politicians are part of it. So hit them where it hurts, hit them in the wallet. And, I would lastly say, I'm not advocating violence against these corporations by any means, but I will say that it is up to ultimately communities, neighborhoods, cities to get together and decide what is best for you, keeping the international working class in mind, and decide how you approach these delicate subjects, how you want to approach these delicate subjects, because we have zero time left. This should have been addressed decades ago, and the further we go down this road, the more we kick the can down the road and do not demilitarize our economy. We're in a huge trouble. These wars continue in large part, because they're very profitable to the U.S. ruling class. And I would say it's up to individuals and small groups in solidarity with the U.S., with the workers of the world, in order to address this, how the individuals and small groups determine. It's not for me to say, or anyone to say, what is right and what is wrong in terms of tactics at the end of the day, because the war corporations are the bad guys. They are the oppressors. They are not just the oppressors stateside, they're the oppressors around the world. And we absolutely must keep in mind, we are the many, they are the few. We are absolutely the many. They're what, few, maybe 1,000 top tier war profiteers in the United States, maybe a few thousand around the world. They're facing what, 7 billion people? I mean, we got it. We just got to.
Okay, thanks for those ideas, Christian. We'll take this one last question from Cale Walker. And Cale, are you still there? Maybe Cale has left us. You still there, Cale?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for taking my comment, really. So people are looking for solutions. I think that someone mentioned the green. Thank you so much. Super informative, super valuable, really, really, really good. Someone was mentioning the Green Deal and all of that, how that's getting, corporatized and all that. I would like to comment that the nuclear power industry and then the nuclear war machine come from the same root. And the nuclear power industry is on its last legs as it is right now, basically as commercial power, because all the plants are kind of closing down, they're aging. There's a huge waste problem. But the nuclear industry is desperate to stay afloat. And they have convinced Congress that nuclear power is clean and green and all of this. And so Congress is promoting nuclear. The DOE is putting billions of dollars into research and development of experimental reactors, which are just more disasters waiting to happen. With the radiological problems that we have across the country are so severe from the industry already. So my point is that alerting the green groups or these climate activist groups that you say no to nuclear power at this time would be a huge dent against that corporate power that right now is trying to take over on that level. So that's the angle I've been working looking at is the nuclear power industry, and the way that they're trying to be a Trojan horse right now in the climate crisis is really amazing to watch. So thank you so much.
No, great point. I mean, I don't know enough about the civilian civilian use of nuclear energy to comment in an educational manner on what you said. But I will say that U.S. war corporations are deeply involved in the nominally government nuclear labs in the United States. So whether it's Lawrence Livermore out in California, or Los Alamos down, I believe it's in New Mexico. These are nominally government labs, but they are run by U.S. war corporations and U.S. academia. All the major war corporations are involved one way or another, either as prime contractors or subcontractors. University of Texas is involved, University of California is involved, and on and on and on. So that's my 2 cents. It's always all about the money, and the war profiteers go, and the war corporations go where the money is, and it's part of corporate America in general taking over more and more government jobs, government functions rather, in alignment with the priorities of neoliberal economic policies. So thank you for your comment. Excellent.
Okay, well, Christian, thank you so much. We really appreciate. Imagine doing all the research to find all those companies and what they're doing and their contracts and all that. We're lucky to have someone doing that for us. Now it's up to us to turn that information into some type of effective action. And we hope you'll get involved with us in that. And Christian will be in touch. And we all have to get his book, of course. And if you come across any interesting new contracts or pieces of information, please send them our way. And hopefully we'll, at some point in the future, in the fall or winter or something, maybe we'll try to come back to you to see what the latest developments are. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I think we'll all agree of how important this issue is, and that we have to figure our way out of this mess. So thank you all, and good evening.